Now let's add some bonds to the transaction. So this is for anyone that wants to actually show bonds on their invoices and then therefore get the parents to collect that bond from an invoice you're generating either in owner or you're going to bill them through owner as well. Okay. The way you do it is you do it on the family transaction screen. Okay. So you go to the family transaction for that particular family, let's say in this particular case, Adams. Okay. Now, like I said before, you have to do the first step. Now, the order is not relevant. Doesn't matter which one you do first, second, or third because they don't link up. Just make sure you do it, basically. You want to add it to the family account screen so you have that record keeping purposes, but you also would want to keep it added to the family transaction screen so that charge is applied, okay? Now, one thing that that we want to make clear here on the bonds, and it's very important, is the same way that fees have an actual charge and then a CCS payment, for example, and then a credit, and these credits offset that charge, a bond needs that same methodology. So we need to add in a charge called, bond fee, okay? So for example, I will add, oops, I clicked the wrong button, didn't I? Yep, I think I did. So I go into the family account name, and so my Zoom controls, yep, are hiding my button. Okay, so, and I click this add transaction button here. I don't know if you can see it right there on the right-hand side. Make sure you've selected your family first, get transaction, and then you add the transaction, okay? First thing you want to do is you want to add a debit. So just before we do that, let's see something. So the current balance of this family is $1,786. Now, let's say I want to add a $200 bond. We know that the balance should be 1986, okay? So to do that, we add the debit, we add the amount $200. I'll put it in as today, so I'll leave the date, and I'll just put bond charge. Now, with this description, it's also clear to make sure, it's also important to make it very clear and transparent what the charge is for, and also to show that it's a charge or fee or whatever wording you want to use. Because if you take a payment from a bond as well, you also get to put in the description. So it's clear to show that one's a charge and one's the payment. Okay, and you'll see that evidently in a second. But basically, you want to actually show that $200 is the bond fee or bond charge, whatever you want to call it, and that's clearly added to the statement. Oh, yeah, yep. Okay, and then therefore the balance is 1986. And then what happens is, which I'll show you in a second, once we take this payment as a credit of $200, the balance will go back to 1786, and the actual balance of the account won't be affected, but the bond will be recorded on the statement. Okay, so two ways we can record the payment of the bond, I guess, if you're putting it on the statement. Number one is if it's outside of owner, you have to add the transaction in as well. Okay. Now, if it's all done outside of owner, you don't necessarily need to put it on the statement because you do have it on the family account screen. But for some people, they might want to, so parents can clearly see it as well. So you just put in a credit of $200. They paid it by, let's say, direct deposit or something, and you can write bond payment. Okay. Now, I'll show you how important it is to get these right in terms of adding the debit correctly and the credit correctly, and also the description. See how clear it is right now that this was the fee for $200, this was the bond payment, a credit of $200, and therefore that's the balance. This makes it nice and easy for the parent to follow along as well. Okay, so they can clearly see this is what the amount was, this is what the payment was. I understand it all. Fantastic. Okay, and now I have a $200 bond balance. Okay, so they can see that as well. Another way you can take a payment as well. So if you're not doing it, if you're doing it within owner, there are two ways we can take the payment. Okay, the first one is right here on the statement. Sorry, I'm so used to scrolling up. The take payment button is also on the left. You click this take payment button. Okay, so essentially on the right is a blue button, which is add transaction. That's how you add the transaction on the statement. On the left is a green button, which is take payment. And this is how we actually physically charge that parent's account. Okay. Now we need to make sure that the parent has already filled out a DDR form, or we already have account details for that family. But essentially what happens is once you have a family here, you can actually take a payment from this account right here, put in the amount, for example, $200, put in the description, and it's exactly like what we did with the take with the add credit. Obviously, I don't have payment information, so I can't proceed with this one. But you would just do the same thing: bond payment, or you can put a more elaborate description if you want, just to show that, but just show that it's a payment, right? You might write bond payment for 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. but make sure that it's clear that it's a payment. And then here you'll have like a little payment via direct debit if they're using direct debit, or payment via credit card if they're using credit cards. Okay, so you'll be able to click that button, and what it will do is it will charge the family their actual bank details or credit card details, and it will apply this credit here on the account. Okay, obviously the same way every other direct debit goes, it'll say processing and it has to go through the channels, but that's how you would take a payment of that bond as a separate sort of charge to their attendances. Okay, now that's one way you can take the payment. Okay, the other way you can do it is just leave it on the account. So for example, we wouldn't have this credit, we would just have this charge of $200. We would also then, generally the bond comes first, then the attendances, so it's a little bit backwards in this scenario that I'm showing you here, but essentially you'll have the $200 bond, you'll have some attendances come in as well, and what you'll do is you'll generate your invoice, and when you generate invoices, I don't think, we have talked about this in other tutorials as well, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but essentially while this decides to not load, what's going to happen is, maybe if I go back, the $200 bond, $200 bond balance will come in as a carryover, okay, plus their fee for that particular period of time equals their amount that they owe. So let's say, for example, the gap that they were meant to pay us is $200. They also have a $200 bond. They will then be charged $400 on their first invoice. Okay, so there are different ways to record bonds depending on the service sort of policies, as well as how what level of owner you're using. Are you just doing CCS with owner? Are you also creating your family accounts? Are you billing your families in owner? So depending on what level you guys are on, because I can see different people on this training at the moment, depending on what level you guys are on, feel free to use any of those sort of methods I've showed you to sort of help with recording bonds.